Hey Hawks, welcome back. Today we're going to start learning about a new president. We're going to move on from James Madison and we're going to start learning about a president named James Monroe. Following the War of 1812, we're going to see the official collapse of the Federalist Party. We're also going to enter a new era, an era called the Era of Good Feelings. Because the Federalist Party is going to be no more, all Americans are going to belong to the same political party, and that political party is the Democratic Republicans. Because of this, everybody's going to feel united. Everybody's going to feel unified as one country. The big effect that the Era of Good Feelings has on Americans is the Era of Good Feelings has everybody feeling very proud to be an American. This idea of nationalism leads to a long time of peace and prosperity among the country. Americans are feeling very proud of themselves, almost untouchable. Just think about it. We just went to war once again with the #1 army in the world of Great Britain, and we defeated them in a second war. James Monroe becomes the 5th president of the United States. And like I mentioned to you earlier, he's part of the Democratic Republican Party. In total, he serves 2 terms from the years of 1817 to 1825. You might remember him. We've talked about him a little bit before when we've talked about the Louisiana Purchase. He's going to be the person who helped Thomas Jefferson negotiate the treaty with France. So the first thing that we're going to talk about under James Monroe's presidency is an issue that happens with Spanish Florida. So if we look at a map right over here, you're going to see that the Florida territory is going to belong to Spain. Don't forget, this is the era of good feelings also. American settlers are feeling good about themselves. They want to start moving into Florida, which obviously did not belong to Americans. And at the same time, you're going to have Seminole Indians living in Florida who would attack American settlements in Georgia and then retreat right back into Florida and would be safe. Another issue that was happening is that slaves living in these southern states would run away into Florida and then they would then be protected by the Seminole Indians. For Americans living in these southern states, they're going to have a huge problem with Florida, and especially the Seminole Indians. Number one, the basic fact that Florida doesn't belong to them. Number two, their settlements are constantly raided by those Seminole Indians. And number two, remember, for them, slaves equal as property. So their slaves running away and being protected by the Seminole Indians, they're losing their property. So as you can imagine, the Americans are angered by this. Until we get Andrew Jackson. The last time you heard about Andrew Jackson, he was a war hero. Andrew Jackson won the Battle of New Orleans and people were very happy with him. So Secretary of War John C. Calhoun is going to send Andrew Jackson to retrieve these runaway slaves. Andrew Jackson heads down south to Georgia and he builds a fort. Whenever he gets here, Andrew Jackson decides it and takes it upon himself to go into Spanish territory. It's a clear invasion of Spain. John C. Calhoun and President Monroe only gave him permission to go terminate the conflict that was going on between the runaway slaves and the Seminole Indians. He never had permission to go into Florida. But for Andrew Jackson, he believed that the best way was to seize Florida from Spain once and for all. Andrew Jackson goes into Florida and he dominates the Seminole Indians. Neither the Seminole Indians nor the Spanish troops could stop his invasion. Britain and Spain are shocked and angry, but the majority of the American public loves it. While there are some people who are very happy with Andrew Jackson, some people are going to think very poorly of him. During his invasion of Florida, he crushed the Seminole Indians and showed no mercy to them, like I mentioned to you before. He had a very different way of fighting, and he learned how to fight like the Seminole Indians. He killed a lot of people in the process. More so, the Spaniards are going to be super upset with Jackson's actions until John Quincy Adams is going to tell Spain, look, I'll give you guys $5 million for Florida, and it just won't be like I just seized it and took it away from you. At the time, Spain was too weak to put up a fight, so they had really no choice to negotiate this treaty with the United States. This treaty is going to be known as the Adams-Onis Treaty. Like I mentioned to you earlier in the last slide, we're going to pay Spain $5 million for this territory. But it is also going to draw a new border right over here by Texas and the new Louisiana Territory. Spain is also going to give up its claims over here in the Oregon Territory, and now that's going to be jointly owned by us and Great Britain. So we look at the map right over here. This is Florida. This is now going to belong to the United States. Here's going to be the new border that I mentioned to you earlier by the Louisiana Territory. And this is going to be the Oregon country, like I said, that's going to be jointly owned by the United States, Great Britain, and Russia. Shifting gears now to the Panic of 1819. When the Era of Good Feelings started, everybody was super happy. Everybody was super proud to be an American. Everybody was feeling proud of themselves. Everybody was buying property, taking out loans, taking a little bit too much more than they could probably handle. And then we eventually get to the Panic of 1819, which is going to bring everybody back down to earth. What this was actually a worldwide financial crisis that happened, but the inept management of the Second Bank of America also is going to cause this panic by giving out way too much credit and then quickly restricting it. These banking policies are eventually going to lead to runs on state banks, bank closures, foreclosures, and bankruptcies. It's going to be the very first financial crisis in the United States, and it leaves terrible effects on the economy. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the issue of slavery or no slavery. During the American Revolution and the Constitutional Convention, we never really fixed the problem of slavery. There's actually a lot of people who felt that eventually slavery was just going to gradually die out. But after we just purchased the Louisiana Territory, we have all this new land that we're going to use to eventually create more states. Slavery is going to be an issue that we need to talk about. So should all these territories of the Louisiana Purchase enter the Union as free states or slave states? So in 1818, Missouri is ready to become a state. They're going to apply for statehood, but whenever they apply for statehood, they're going to apply as a slave state. The problem was that the United States had an equal balance of number of free states and slave states. Missouri coming into the Union, having a slave state, they would give a lot of power to the slave states because there would be more slave states than free states. Congress needed to find a solution on how the United States could admit new states into the Union. The states in the North did not want to allow a state that was a slave state into the Union. They felt that if they would allow more slave states and they held more power, then they would be outvoted in Congress. So Henry Clay comes up with a solution, and it's called the Missouri Compromise. In the Missouri Compromise, it was said that slavery was going to be forbidden in the new Louisiana Territory north of the Missouri Compromise line, except for Missouri right over here. The next thing that they said is that they were going to create a new state called Maine, and that way admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, the balance of free to slave states would be equal in the Senate. The issue of slavery is not fixed with the Missouri Compromise. What it did do is that temporarily it did give 12 free states and 12 slave states. That way there's equal representation in Congress. The problem is that these states are going to continue to fight and disagree on how they were going to handle the expansion of slavery to the West. There's going to be an obvious divide amongst the nation between the northern states and the southern states. All this is going to do is temporarily fix a problem of tension between these states and these sections of the United States. So let's quickly look at a map of the United States after the Missouri Compromise. Here in the South, you have all the states that are slave states. Here in the North, you have all the states that are free states. Here's Missouri, the only state that's going to be allowed to be a slave state above the 3630 Missouri Compromise line. This Arkansas Territory, we don't have a state yet, but it is open to slavery. Alright guys, well that is going to conclude part 1 of James Monroe. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great day.
To understand what the Missouri Compromise is and why it's so significant in American history, we have to take it back about 200 years. Now, let me set the stage for you. The year is 1820. The U.S. is a young nation with 22 states, 11 free states in the North and 11 slave states in the South. But this balance is called into question when Missouri, a piece of land acquired from the Louisiana Purchase, wanted to be admitted into the Union as a slave state. Slavery was a highly contentious issue in the U.S. at this point. Some were pushing for the total abolition of slavery, while others looked to expand it. This issue pinned families and states against each other, creating a powder keg just waiting to explode. With tensions already high, the idea of Missouri entering as a slave state prompted heated debate in Congress, and throughout the nation too. Not just about Missouri, of course, but also how slavery factored into all future states and the future of the nation. Many argued over whether Congress even had the right to spread or limit slavery in the United States at all. While Northerners argued Congress should be allowed to prohibit slavery, Southerners insisted on popular sovereignty, the idea that it should be up to the states to determine this for themselves. These sentiments sound familiar? The biggest sticking point of the debate was political power. You see, Missouri's entrance as a slave state would throw off the balance of power in Congress. So to keep things even, Congress hashed out a separate solution, a compromise of sorts. In exchange for Missouri's admission as a slave state, the Northern Territory of Maine would be admitted as a free state. This ensured equal representation between the North and the South. A second part of the compromise banned slavery throughout the remaining Louisiana Purchase territory north of latitude line 3630. But while the Missouri Compromise limited the spread of slavery, it did nothing to abolish slavery in states that already had it. So while in some ways it staved off a civil war, it was only because it just maintained the status quo. The admission of Missouri as a slave state only fanned the flames of the national debate over slavery, a fierce disagreement that wouldn't be resolved until the end of the Civil War.
If the internet had been around in 1817, James Monroe would have been our most friended president. Even John Quincy Adams, who was considered a complete grouch, liked Monroe. So why was Monroe such a hot property? Well, it helped that ladies loved cool James.
Oh, James.
One Virginia socialite described him as tall and well-formed. In modern speak, that would be total hottie. Even Thomas Jefferson said that Monroe was so honest that if you turned his soul inside out, there would not be a spot on it. The extremely popular Monroe made it to the top of the A-list when he was elected the 5th President of the United States. Monroe had big plans for America, including making America bigger. His Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, convinced Spain to sell us Florida, after we had already invaded it. Americans were spreading out, moving west, borrowing money, and buying land. Everyone was feeling so good about Monroe's presidency that they actually called it the era of good feelings. It was like a national beach party.
When Monroe was president, everybody was feeling really, really great. Maybe it was something in the water, I don't know. But people were fighting less and less. The political parties were getting along more and more.
But the party ended in 1819. Remember all that money people were borrowing to buy land? Many Americans couldn't pay back the money they borrowed. Everyone panicked. Banks failed. People lost their jobs and their homes. And those good feelings soon turned bad. Speaking of bad feelings, Monroe's second crisis dealt with the issue of slavery. When the territory of Missouri wanted to become the state of Missouri, the country was divided. Should Missouri be allowed into the Union as a slave state?
The Missouri Compromise was an attempt to balance slave and free states where there would be one for one. If a slave state came in, a free state would have to come into the Union.
Maine was added as a free state, keeping the number of slave and free states equal. But America was now pretty much literally divided in half.